She was going to go to church to give a confession like she had done countless times before throughout her entire life. Except this time, she never got home. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Irene Garza. Viewer discretion is advised. Irene Garza was born on November 15th, 1934. She was born to parents Nicholas and Josefina. She was born in, Hidalgo County in Texas, but then the family would move closer, to the McAllen, Texas area, which is where she would spend most of her life. Her parents owned a really successful dry cleaning company, and they made a pretty decent amount of money doing that. When they first started doing it, they obviously didn't have much, but then as time went on, they were able to get themselves into a nicer house and sort of, give Irene, basically whatever she wanted and whatever she needed. Irene would attend McAllen High School, and actually there she became the very first Latina to perform as a twirler and also a head drum majorette, the first Latina in her school to ever do that. She was popular, but she was also described as someone who was pretty shy, maybe a little soft-spoken is probably a better choice of words. But she, like I said, she was still popular. She would win Homecoming Queen. In 1958, she won the Miss All-South Texas Sweetheart competition. Basically, she was a beauty pageant winner. Soon after graduating high school, she would then go to college, and then she would become, after all that, a school teacher. And by 1960, she is about 25 years old, and she's teaching second grade, something she absolutely loves doing. She had written a letter, to friends or family, describing herself as being someone pretty shy, but also she was extremely proud of herself. She found her work as a teacher to be an extremely fulfilling thing because she was not only educating, but she was enriching the lives of so many kids. And just before this story takes place, she had become the secretary of the Parent-Teacher Association in that area. And she was also super proud of that as well. One of the most important aspects to Irene's life was her faith. She was a member of Legion of Mary, and she was a very, very devout Catholic. Irene would actually go to Mass every single day, and she would take her communion every single day. And she was also someone who would absolutely take part in the confessionals, and she did it all the time. She almost seemed to be very much by the book when it came to her religion and her beliefs. It was April 16th, 1960, and it's a Saturday. The following day was Easter Sunday. Huge, obviously, in the Catholic faith, and Irene was so excited for that Easter Sunday. She was still living with her parents at the time, and on that evening, April 16th, she decided that she was going to go to her church, which was the Sacred Heart Church there in McAllen, and what she was planning to do that night was to do the confessional, right before Easter Sunday. Irene was a very memorable person, meaning she stood out. Her beauty and her confidence and everything, whenever she was at church, everyone could tell she was there. Everyone knew she was there, not because of her striking beauty only, but because of her personality and just who she was. People tended to kind of just flock to her. So that evening, many people can recall, yep, we definitely saw Irene come into the church that night. The line for the confessional was very long, and according to some witnesses, that line was moving pretty slowly because the father, the priest there, his name was John Fite. Apparently, every once in a while, he would leave the confessional booth to go, out, maybe to take a break. I'm not really entirely sure what, but the line was moving very slow because he was going very slow. So again, many people saw Irene there at the church waiting in line for her confessional. Later that night, sometime around midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, her parents realized that Irene had still not come home. They also knew that there was going to be a midnight mass. So they figured, Irene probably just stuck around for that, and that's where she was. So they went to bed. But then they woke up a couple hours later, and this is 3 or 4 in the morning now, And they still notice that Irene hasn't come home yet, and that is extremely unusual. That is not something she had ever done before. She would never just sort of go somewhere and not let her parents know ahead of time. And her folks just knew something was wrong. So they went to McAllen Police Department and they reported her missing because this was just highly unusual. When police got involved, they interviewed the parents, of course, and they told police, everything that Irene was doing that night, that she had gone to the church. So police went to the church and they interviewed people, other parishioners there who were there at the time. They got many statements from people stating, yep, we definitely saw Irene. And a couple of them said that Irene did not do her confessional in the church. Instead, Father Fight took her somewhere else. He took her to the rectory of the Sacred Heart, which was off of, I guess, the church grounds, or on the church grounds, but away from the church itself. And that is something that typically he didn't do. He didn't really bring any of his parishioners to that building to do a face-to-face confession, but that's what everyone says happened. And then after that, no one really saw Irene again. When police questioned Father Fight, he said, no, that didn't happen. I did her confession in the confessional booth there in the church. I definitely did not take her away from the church to do it. About a day and a half after she was officially reported missing, this is about April 18th now, they find some physical evidence, something kind of concerning. They find one of Irene's shoes, her beige high heel, that was just sort of kind of lying on the ground near a curb. It was the left shoe, but I don't believe the right one has ever been found. The shoe did appear to be a little scuffed up. Then several hundred feet away, they found her veil that she was wearing that night. And then a couple hundred feet from there, they found Irene's purse that looked pretty dirty and scuffed up as well. So now the police, they have volunteers, they obviously have the family, they have this massive search for Irene Garza. We found her belongings. She's missing. We fear the worst, but we need to find her. And so they're looking everywhere for her. While all of this was going on, a woman calls police to say that she was Irene Garza. She was kidnapped. She doesn't know where she is. And, please come find me. Police would find out soon enough. It was not Irene. It was someone doing a stupid prank. And then a man would tell someone, at a restaurant, that he was the one to actually kill Irene Garza. And police looked into him, and they quickly learned that that man was lying. He had told that to this individual in a joking manner because he was just drunk at the time. So the search continued until April 21st, 1960. Just a few days after she went missing, Irene Garza was found. About 6 or 7 miles away from where she was last seen, there was this very long canal. Passerbys noticed something floating in that canal. And when they got close, they realized it was a body of a woman. When police arrived, they confirmed that this is a deceased woman. She was face down in the water, kind of just sort of floating, but sort of like stationary. She was fully dressed in a dress that matched the description of the dress that Irene was last seen wearing. And so they pulled the body from the water, brought her to the coroner, and they would determine that and confirm that this, in fact, was the body of Irene Garza. Her autopsy would show that Irene was sexually assaulted. She had been beaten. They believed she was beaten unconscious and then sexually assaulted, and that her cause of death ultimately was strangulation. Any hopes of finding trace evidence on her body, however, like any kind of potential fingerprints or hair samples, anything like that, was gone because she was found floating in water, and she had probably been in that water for at least a couple of days. And this is also way before DNA was even a thought in anyone's mind, so they didn't even know to look for that. So what police decided to do, pretty much as soon as they found the body, they decided to go back to the canal and drain it and see if they could find any evidence near where she was found. And they did. They found two kind of key things. They found a candelabra that would be identical to a candelabra, I guess, that was seen at the Sacred Heart Church that they would use there. And then they found something very unusual. They found this bluish green slide viewer thing, and it had like a super long cord with it. So they collected it. They weren't sure if this had anything to do with Irene. It seemed very random, but they said, we're going to take it because you never know. They did put that image out on the news, in the newspapers and whatnot, to see if anyone recognized it. And who do you think came forward to say recognized the slide viewer? Father John Fite. He said that was his slide viewer. Okay, why was it in the canal near where her body was found? He didn't really have an answer for that. But police are curious, and so they bring him back in for questioning. This time he changes his story. He now says he did, in fact, bring Irene back to the rectory to take her confession face to face. He says, though, that they did the confession and then she left. And that was the last time he saw her. Okay, so who is this John Fite fella, right? What's he all about? Does he have any seedy history? He sure does. As a matter of fact, just 3 weeks before Irene's murder, John Fite had gotten himself into some serious trouble. A young woman named Maria America Guerra, she was at a different church, again, 3 weeks before Irene Garza's story. She was kneeling down at the confessional of this church when she was suddenly assaulted from behind. She was then taken and sexually assaulted by this man. She got a pretty good look at the guy. When she basically ended up seeing a picture of Father John Fite, and she said, "That's the guy. That is who took me and sexually assaulted me." So surely he would have been reprimanded seriously, right? And put in prison because he sexually assaulted a woman. No. You know what they allowed him to do? Basically plead it out and pay $500. That is it. He got no jail time, and he just had to pay $500 for basically kidnapping and sexually assaulting a young woman. Technically, it is a conviction because it was like a no plead thing. So, but again, he didn't serve any actual jail time, but he does at least have it on his record. But for some reason, police kind of just stopped looking at John Fite for this Irene Garza murder. They say, well, we don't got any physical evidence to pin this murder to him, which was technically true, even though it was his admitted slide projector found near her body. It didn't show any connection itself to her murder. I mean, that slide projector with the cord, maybe that was used to kill her, but they didn't really have any way of proving that. So they really couldn't physically connect him to the murder, even though he kind of fit the bill at this point. Even though he was the last person to see her alive, 3 weeks prior, he sexually assaults a young woman close to Irene's age and got away with it, basically. But for some reason, they're just like, we got nothing, we got to stop this. Police looked into other potential suspects, like anyone with prior convictions, any sex offenders in the area. They lucked out. And so the case itself just went cold, and it stayed cold for a very, very long time. Shortly after John Fite was, the whole sexual assault, no contest plea and all that, and then after the murder of Irene, where he was considered a suspect for some time, I guess the Catholic Church sent him to some sort of monastery, or I guess something called the Assumption Abbey in Missouri, apparently to, work on himself. I'm not 100% sure. But he was there for some time, and then he kind of just sort of fell off the face of the earth, the radar, for a long time. And then In 2002, this is 42 years after Irene's murder, a monk named Dale Tackney, a former monk, he wasn't a monk anymore at this time, he was at the monastery with Father Fight back in the early 60s. Dale Tackney goes to police in 2002 because he says he can no longer hide this information he got over 40 years ago from John Fight. While at the monastery, John Fight confessed to this monk, Dale Tackney, that he murdered Irene Garza. He said even to this monk, a couple of weeks prior to that, I had assaulted another young woman. Given, this is the Catholic Church and confessions are technically protected, and I think I'm not positive on this, someone can maybe correct me on this, but I think there is something where they are allowed to spill a confession, technically, if people may pose a danger to others, like if someone confessed to murder, but I'm not sure. That being said, this Dale Tackney guy didn't actually say anything to anyone until about 42 years later. So, when he goes to police, the police, along with the district attorney, they find another gentleman, Father Joseph O'Brien, who I guess Dale Tackney had said might also have this story. So they track down Father O'Brien, and he also tells police, yes, John Fight confessed to me about a murder he committed back in 1960. And again, he kept that to himself for 4 decades. The district attorney at the time, and this is now 2004 or so, decided not to bring an indictment upon John Fight. Just decided to say, well, there's no physical evidence, and all I have are these confessions of 2 different people who say that this man confessed to the murder. I guess it's not enough, so we're not going to do anything about it. And then in 2014, now a lot more time has gone by, with no updates or anything, that district attorney who decided to not press charges, well, he was running for re-election, and there was another gentleman running for election, and the new gentleman was like, I'm running on the platform of, I'm going to solve this Irene Garza case. And so the new individual ended up winning the race, and so he took over as district attorney, and he was hell-bent on fulfilling his campaign promise. What did he kind of uncover? Well, here's some interesting information. Back in 1960, a lot of the elected officials there in Hidalgo County, McAllen, Texas area, most of them were Catholic. And also, during that time of the investigation, a gentleman, maybe you've heard of him, John F. Kennedy, well, he was running for president. He was also a Catholic. So basically, what was essentially uncovered, now all the way in 2014, they actually found a letter stating that we cannot have the Catholic Church look bad. They basically acknowledged without really saying it that Father Fight was likely the murderer of this young woman, but we cannot take this scandal right now. So we have a Catholic running for president. We've got officials in this area running for re-elections who are Catholic. If they find out about this Catholic priest who did this horrible thing to this woman, it's going to look bad on all of us. So let's just sweep it under the rug. So there became this understanding between the Catholic Church and the authorities in that area during the 1960, 1961, 62 investigation into this murder of, we're just going to sweep it under the rug. And we're just going to hope it goes away. It didn't go away. So the new district attorney, Ricardo Rodriguez, he went gung-ho towards this case, and he was going to get a conclusion. John Fight was the right guy from the very, very beginning. He had literally just committed a very similar crime, minus the murder, just weeks prior. His projector was found right where her body was found. A candelabra from the church, his church, was also found there. What relevance they had, by the way, I'm still not 100% positive. If they determined if maybe the cord he strangled her with, I don't know. Not only that, but they found testimony in the file from people who said the night that Irene went missing, Father John Fite had gone into the confessionals with nothing, no scratches or anything on him. Later that night, after Irene is last seen, he comes back with scratches on his hands and arms. That was told to police, but nothing. Well, where is John Fite now? Because now we're rolling into 2016 at this point. John Fite had apparently moved to Phoenix, Arizona. Hi, that's in my neck of the woods. Way back in, I guess, the 70s or the 80s. And then by 2016, he was living in Scottsdale, Arizona. And, in 2016, he was an 83-year-old man who could barely walk. At that time, he had stage 3 kidney cancer and also bladder cancer. So he was battling 2 different things, plus just his old age, but they're still like, you're not getting away with this. So they slapped cuffs on him. And in February of 2016, in Scottsdale, Arizona, John Fite was arrested for the murder of Irene Garza. 56, 57 years, a little too late, but at least he was arrested. Now, according to his records, he got into literally no more trouble down that run. It doesn't mean he didn't do anything more. He could have, and then maybe there's more unsolved cases out there, but he did not have any convictions for the rest of his, between 1960 whatever and when they found him again. His defense didn't really have much of a defense, but at the same time, the prosecution didn't have a ton of physical evidence to actually say for sure that he did this murder. But they had the now testimony of the witnesses who say they saw him scratched up that same night. They have the testimony of the fact that he himself acknowledged he lied about taking Irene to the rectory that night. They have his confessed projector under her body where she was found. They have his prior sort of conviction for assaulting a woman. They also have the testimony of 2 different men who claim that John Fite confessed to them that he committed the murder, and he gave them details as well. Now, Father Joseph O'Brien had already passed away by the time he was arrested in 2016, but Mr. Hackney was still alive, and he was able to testify at the trial. In December of 2017, John Fite was found guilty of the murder of Irene Garza by a jury of his peers. And his defense was like, can we sentence him to probation? He's old. He's 83 years old. He's got cancer. What's the point of putting him back in jail? The point is he murdered someone. He needs to be punished for it. The prosecution was like, can we recommend 57-year sentence? Why 57 years? Because that's how long it was in between the murder until the day he was convicted. But the jury was like, I see your 57 years. I'm going to raise you life in prison without parole. Life for someone like John Fite, who was 83 battling cancer, probably wasn't going to be very long, but it's really more of the principle. On February 12th, 2020, at the W.J. Estelle unit in Huntsville, Texas, John Fite died of his illnesses in prison. John Fite was a known predator. The Catholic Church knew he was a predator. The Catholic Church decided that it was in their best interest for this man to not be punished for what he did because of their interests, because of political people running for office, because of whoever the hell running for president. They decided that they did not want to add more to, let's be honest, more of a scandal than they already had and continues to have over the decades. They let this man live his life when Irene Garza was not afforded that right by one of their people. I don't believe charges were brought against anyone else in terms of like people saying, let's sweep this on the rug. I don't think any officers or attorneys or anyone in the church was ever prosecuted for anything. But it still needs to be known. It needs to be known that that's why he wasn't caught for 57 years. Does it make me a little mad? Yeah, just a little bit. Just a little bit. because God forbid he did hurt more women, and we don't know that he didn't, that's on them if he did. That is completely on them. Irene Garza was a wonderful, beautiful, talented woman. She was proud of the work she did with her students, and her second grade students loved Miss Garza. Irene was, at the age of 25 or 26, she was finally kind of coming into her own, and she was finally kind of living life the way she wanted to live. But a priest decided that because he could not contain his own disgusting predator thoughts and actions, that Irene Garza didn't deserve to continue living, because he needed to satisfy his disgusting, immoral nature. For Irene Garza's sake, I hope that she found her way to heaven, and I hope that in some fashion she has found peace. But that is it for this video, True Crime Aronies. I hope you found it interesting. Like I've been doing kind of a little bit here and there, let's do a live, laugh, lose card. Basically, there's a random joke card you pull from the deck, I said, you creeps. It's got a dad joke on it, right? And then you gotta pull a card that has a delivery. So you have to deliver that joke in whatever it tells you the way to do it here. So, I have to read the joke like Elvis Presley. Alright, sugar mama, here we go. What do you call a man with no arms and no legs in a pool? What do you call a man with no arms and no legs in a pool, sugar? Does he say sugar? I don't even know. What do you call him? You call him Bob. Bob is probably dying. You threw a man with no limbs into the pool, and you call him Bob as a joke? The man is drowning. He's dying. Get in there and save him. He can't flap anything to make himself afloat, you crazy son of a bitch. Jesus, that's murder. This is taking a very dark turn. That was supposed to be a funny joke, but I went a little crazy at the end. So, I'm trying to rewind time, but I can't. It's not working. I don't have that thing from Harry Potter when they return. What are you doing, Mike? I don't even know. Hi. Okay. Well, this is super awkward. Bye, I guess. Oh, I look shiny. Oh, God, have I been shiny this whole time? Oh, that's embarrassing. Okay, bye. Sometimes it's those that are there to protect and serve that are actually the real monsters. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Anna Anton. Viewer discretion is advised. Anna Marie Anton was born on February 13th, 1952, and she was actually born in Washington, D.C. But eventually she found her way in Milford, Iowa. She had been, I guess, raised by her grandparents. I don't really have a whole ton of background information on her, but I do know that her grandparents raised her. She had dropped out of high school at one point, but then she ended up going back to get her diploma. Then she would end up attending Estherville Junior College. When she was, a bit younger, she had experimented with drugs and stuff like that, but it never really took over her life, and it got to a point where she was able to kind of move past that. She had met a man named Tom, and the two of them, I guess, hit it off pretty quickly. They would end up getting married, but by September of 1986, Anna and Tom would end up divorcing. She claimed that Tom was a bad guy. He was abusive. He was involved with drug dealers, and so she needed to get away from all of that. That is what she told people. After the divorce, she would find herself in the little community or the town of Lyons, Nebraska. It was little back then, at least. She ends up moving into a house they called the Pink House because it was all pink. So she moves into the ground floor this apartment building, and then there's a basement underneath where she could store, any of her belongings. The mayor of Lyons, her name was Mary Piper, she had met Anna Anton and said there really wasn't any reason why Anna should have ever even moved to this community of Lyons because there's nothing there. She thought it was strange that, this kind of younger woman would just pick up and move to this area by herself without really securing a job or anything. It was odd to the mayor and some of the locals. She was unemployed at the time that this case occurred, but she was getting money through disability because she had gotten into a pretty serious crash that ended up causing her to lose mobility in her legs, and so she had to walk around with a cane, and she at that point was not able to really drive herself, and she would end up attending St. Joseph's Catholic Church there in Lyons, where she became quick friends with several people who went there, the parishioners, and the parishioners there were always there to help her. They would drive her from place to place. They would bring her groceries. They did a lot for her. They helped her a lot. One neighbor, a woman named Shirley Edgecombe, said that, she looked at Anna as this very deeply religious person. She seemed to come off as really sweet, kind, caring, nurturing, and just wanted the best for everyone. They had nothing negative to ever say about her. But Anna would confide in this neighbor, Shirley, about her husband, Tom, and said that her husband, Tom, had been a part of some big drug ring, and that Anna said she had to testify against her husband at trial, and now she's kind of afraid for her life because she doesn't know if her husband or anyone else from this drug ring are going to come after her. And she told Shirley, the reason why I specifically moved here to Lyons, is specifically to this particular building, this pink house, is because she knew the upstairs tenant, a man named Greg Webb. Greg Webb was the chief of police in Lyons, Nebraska. Greg Webb was originally from Sioux City, Iowa, but then he eventually found his way out to Lyons, Nebraska, where he quickly became the chief of police, which I guess really isn't saying a whole lot because at that time, they really only had, I think, 2 or 3 total officers there. This was a town of about 1,200 people back then, and crime just never happened. They never needed to arrest anyone. In fact, they didn't even have jail cells there. But he was considered a well-respected, beloved member of the community. He would even help out in nearby cities and counties. When he was off of his work as police chief, he would go to other areas to kind of help their police forces. So he was looked at as this really good, honorable guy. He also had a previous relationship. He had been married to a woman named Karen, and they had a child together. At the time of this case, his child is 12 years old, but he and his wife Karen had divorced. And Anna had met Greg previously, like a few months prior to all of this, and I guess she found out through him that there is this vacant apartment on the ground floor of this pink house, and if you needed it, it's there for you. And so that's eventually when she moved there. She told Shirley, the neighbor, so the reason why I came here is because there's a police chief above me, and his police car is always parked out front. So if my, crazy husband Tom or anyone from his gang try to come there and do something to her, they're going to see a cop car and they're going to get freaked out and go away. And then one day Anna gave Shirley an envelope, and she said, if anything ever happens to me, I want you to open this envelope, and I want you to call the number that's in it. It apparently belonged to a friend of Anna's in Iowa, and that, she would basically know what to do. That basically something happened to her, and that's the reason why you need this envelope, and my friends there in Iowa will be able to kind of go from there. She was also very paranoid. She would never open the door for anyone. She required them to announce themselves, and she needed to be able to see them out the window to even consider opening the door for them. This takes us to December 15th, 1986. It was the evening, and neighbors saw Anna being dropped off in front of her apartment building by a local there, and they saw Anna walk into her apartment, and that was the last time they ever saw her. The following day, December 16th, Shirley had already prearranged to get a couple groceries for Anna. So Shirley goes to get the groceries. She comes back to the house. She knocks on the door. Anna doesn't answer. She calls out for Anna. Doesn't answer. She waits a few more minutes. Bangs louder on the door. Nothing. She starts to tap on some of the windows. No response. Calling out her name. She's getting nowhere. Something feels off. But she ends up going back to her house across the street. She waits a few hours. She comes back over, knocks on the door, does the whole process all over again. But again, no response. And then that's when Shirley went to Greg Webb's apartment and said, hey, I haven't heard from Anna. Have you? He's like, no. All right, well, can you maybe let me into her apartment so I can make sure everything's okay? Greg had a spare key, I guess, to her apartment, to Anna's. So Greg and Shirley unlock the front door of Anna's apartment and they walk inside. They kind of expect that they're going to find Anna maybe unconscious. Maybe she fell and hurt herself somehow because she did have a hard time moving around. She needed a cane. Maybe she slipped and hit her head. But when they walked inside the apartment, they found no trace of her at all. The apartment itself was in relatively normal condition. Nothing seemed to be out of place. Nothing was stolen. There was no forced entry. It was all normal, except Anna wasn't there. When Shirley goes to her bedroom, she sees that Anna has an outfit laid out on the bed that, she would normally do that. So, and then she had her shoes. Anna's shoes were found on the floor of next to the bed. And, Shirley said that was very strange because if Anna wasn't there, why was she not in her shoes? All of her shoes were in the apartment that Shirley knew about. Why would she lay out a change of clothes on the bed and then not put them on if she was leaving the house? Things that were missing from the apartment, however, was like Anna's purse. There was also a coat that Shirley remembered her having that was not there, and the cane was not there. And that's another reason why, Shirley was like, okay, her shoes are here, just thrown on the ground, sort of as if someone had dropped them there. And she went out with a coat and she went out with a purse and her cane, but she didn't wear shoes. That's very odd. Shirley found an address book in Anna's apartment and said, hey, I can probably call some of these numbers, some of her friends, to see if, we can do something. But Greg instead said, you know what, give me the book. Since it is my job as, police chief, I will call the numbers in there. A few hours go by and Greg calls Shirley and says, I called all the numbers I could, but Anna wasn't with any of them and none of them had heard from her. Greg then put out the idea, well, Anna does sometimes take these impromptu vacations or trips. And Shirley was like, not really, but okay. So Shirley says, well, we can't find Anna. So you're the chief of police. We need to file a missing persons report. And so I want to do that. Well, he told her, we'll wait a few more days. She is, a 30-year-old adult. She's allowed to go away on her own. Doesn't have to tell anyone anything. And we'll just sit here. We'll wait for her to show back up. By December 23rd, 1986, is when he finally said, okay, let's report her missing. On December 27th, 1986, 11 days after Anna vanished, the nude, frozen body of a woman was found in a desolate field. It was really kind of just, like a few feet off the side of this road. Very rural road, doesn't really have a lot of buildings next to it. It's very isolated and very desolate. Not a lot of people really are out there. But some local farmers came across this body in this field. So they contacted, obviously, the police. When they arrived, they confirmed that this is the body of a young woman, and she had been shot to death. She had 2 gunshot wounds to her stomach by a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver. Now, this is about 20 miles away from Lyons, from where Anna was last seen alive. Now, and her body was technically found on the Winnipeg reservation, so that created a whole lot of jurisdictional issues. When Greg Webb found out about this body being discovered, he would go out to the scene and he would confirm that this was, in fact, the body of Anna Anton. The detectives at the scene would take note that there was no blood that pooled underneath her head. There was no blood found on the actual ground or the leaves and, grass and all that. And so they believe that Anna was actually killed somewhere else, and this is just where they dumped her. Nebraska State Patrol was called in to basically investigate this case because of all of the jurisdictional issues. They also, the coroner and the detectives who actually saw her body there in the field, but they would all make note that Anna was extremely clean. Someone had washed her entire body. It appeared that someone had taken water and showered over her entire body, getting rid of everything. And that's by someone who knows to do that. They believe that whoever did this did that with the intent of getting rid of any physical evidence of themselves on the body. So Shirley, the neighbor, tells police about this envelope that Anna gave her. And basically the police would look into this phone number in there about a person in Iowa, and they came to the conclusion that Anna basically was going to imply that Tom, if something happened to her ex-husband Tom, is the one who made it happen. Because again, she had told everyone that Tom was basically a drug lord involved in the drug trafficking rings, and he was a big scary guy. When police tracked down Tom, he isn't in prison, and when they ask Tom and his relatives and family and friends and all that about this drug stuff, he's like, what? People were like, Tom is very quiet. He's patient. He's a very sweet guy. He's a nurturing type guy. He loved Anna. He's not involved in drugs at all. As a matter of fact, police found no proof or evidence that he had anything to do with the drug world. And, he wasn't abusive towards Anna, at least that nobody knows. And pretty much everyone was saying good things about him. And they were able to determine that his alibi at the time the murder would have happened, they confirmed it without a shadow of a doubt. Tom had nothing to do with this. But for some reason, Anna had lied about who Tom was and what he's capable of. He wasn't any of the things that she said he was. There are some people from Anna's life who said that, these were clearly delusions that Anna had, that perhaps, mentally speaking, she may not have been all that there, but also wasn't being treated for anything. So at one point, all of these officers involved in this murder case now, they meet at a local diner to kind of go over each other's notes. And at that diner is Greg Webb, the cop neighbor who lived upstairs. And he was basically injecting himself into this investigation, despite the fact that it was out of his jurisdiction at that point. Well, one of the chief detectives in this looked at Greg and said, hey, you lived above her. Do you know her? He's like, yeah, we met a few months ago. I'm the one who helped her get this apartment. Then they ask him, well, have you ever had sexual relations with her? He says, no, absolutely not. Then the detective looked at him and sort of saw something in Greg's face. And he asked him one more time. He's like, Greg, have you ever had sex with Anna Anton? Greg then changes his tune and says, okay, fine, yes. The night she moved in, we had sex. At that point, all of the other detectives and officers that were there kindly asked Greg to get up and leave the restaurant because now he may be a suspect. When they kind of unearthed that comment from Greg, their wheels began to turn. They're like, wait a minute. The body was found on a Native American, on a reservation. And a police officer might know to do that on purpose, to create a jurisdictional nightmare. Her body was cleaned from head to toe, spotless. No physical evidence found on her body. A detective or a police chief or anything like that involved in law enforcement would know that's something that you should do. So at that point, he is now considered a suspect directly, but they need proof. They go to Anna's apartment and they use luminol. They spray all over the place, and they do in fact find traces of blood drops throughout her apartment. The blood drops would then lead out of her apartment and up a flight of stairs that actually ends up going directly to Greg Webb's apartment. They take swabs of all of these potential blood samples. They confirm presumptively that it is blood. Then they compare the blood DNA to blood type that they believed was Anna's blood type, and they can confirm that Anna's blood type matched the blood type of these blood drops throughout the apartments leading up to Greg's apartment. So at that point, because the blood did go up there, they did get a warrant to search Greg Webb's apartment. At that point, Greg fled the area. They found out he traded in his 1971 Mercury Cougar to some used car shop. He then goes to a travel agency where he purchases tickets to go to Belize or Costa Rica. He's trying to pick his way out of the country to go to. On December 30th, they found out he withdrew his entire savings, every ounce, every penny he had in his accounts. He drained it, and then he vanished. He was apparently spotted at one point by the mayor of Lyons. And she goes, hey, what's going on? He's like, I'm just going away for a few days. I need to kind of get away from everything, taking a few days off. But then she never saw him again. But they are still able to enter Greg's apartment because they have the warrant to do so. They find a mop that had been recently used, and that mop had traces of blood on it. And again, it was the same blood type that that was Anna's blood type. They also found traces of blood in the trunk of his police car, because he had obviously left that back at home. They didn't find any sign of a struggle in Anna's apartment or in Greg's apartment, but that means he could have just cleaned it up. From their investigation, they discovered through talking to people that Anna was kind of infatuated with Greg. He liked her, she liked him. They had a sexual relationship at some point, whether it be one time or multiple times, it's not really known. And Anna was convinced that she was going to start dating Greg, and maybe, hey, one day we'll get married. But then she heard him in his apartment one night having sex with another woman. She thought he was going to be exclusive with her, but the neighbor Shirley said that it really it infuriated Anna a lot, to a point where she actually observed Anna get holy water, and she sprinkled that holy water from the steps leading from her apartment to his. She just kept splashing it. So when they found that out, they were like, okay, it's there must have been some kind of incident or argument between these two, because they were clearly on two different pages. They did find out that on the night that Anna would have disappeared, they can confirm through witnesses that Greg Webb was very intoxicated that night. They think that he had entered either her apartment or she entered his, where she started to argue with him with regards to these other women. An argument broke out, and he ended up shooting her in the abdomen twice. There would be at least one witness who stated they saw Greg carrying a large bag of something from his apartment and seeing him put that thing into the trunk of his police cruiser and then driving away. It was the perfect size of a body, and so they believe that that was, in fact, him taking Anna's body out and bringing her to where she was found. He knew to carefully wash her body, remove her clothing, and he knew to dispose of her body in a location that would create a police nightmare. He thought he was doing all that by committing the perfect crime, the perfect murder. But I don't think he realized that those things would make him an obvious suspect. He was also banking on this fact that the ex-husband, Tom, was going to be a viable suspect, because it sounds like he believed what Anna told him about him, which turned out not to be true. But, Greg has already fled. And so an arrest warrant is issued in January of 1987 for his arrest, and he is being charged with first-degree murder. They did find out that he had purchased a ticket to go to Belize in Central America. They just don't, and someone used it. They just don't know if it was him who used it. So at that point, once he may have potentially fled the country, the FBI becomes involved. The mayor of Lyons would, tell the investigators, Greg was a good cop. He was respected here in this community. He was very professional, very knowledgeable, very smart. He was he was not an asshole cop or anything, and that this is not like him. And so there were people who believed that, multiple theories, that one, Greg fled because he didn't want to be wrongly accused of this, because that's happened obviously many, many times in history. He didn't want to go to jail for something he didn't do. They also thought, one theory is maybe he fled because he knows who the real killer is, and that killer is going to come after him. Another theory was floated out there that perhaps he was protecting the actual killer. But these are all theories. These are all, who knows it is. They had another suspect named Tony Sears, who was a mutual friend of Anna and Greg, and he was apparently seen at the apartment the day she would have disappeared. But they also would later confirm that he had an alibi, and he was nowhere near the scene when the actual murder would have likely happened, and he wasn't the guy. People had seen Greg wavering a .38 Smith & Wesson around, which was actually the murder weapon of Anna. And so it all points to him. He's trying to get away. He's trying to throw the blame on other people. It all points to him being guilty of this. But where the fudge is he? That's the question. So this story airs on Unsolved Mysteries. It airs on America's Most Wanted. It's plastered on the news stations all across the entire country. Even other countries are sharing this story, that because, like Belize and stuff, because maybe he might still be there. But on February 17th, 1993, a man named John Barrington was watching Unsolved Mysteries in Orlando, Florida. And when he saw Greg's image pop up on the screen, he's like, holy shit. That is my coworker, Gregory Weber. Wow. Way to really sneak that one in. Gregory Weber instead of Greg Webb. Man, what a master of disguise there. But he was a construction worker working with this tipster. And he was like, yeah, that's him. That's 100% him. He recognized him right from the get-go. And so he contacted the police. He contacted the Unsolved Mysteries and America's Most Wanted hotlines just to make sure. So he ends up taking, I guess they have records of the ID that Greg Weber used to get his job at the construction place in Florida. So that company, they faxed over the image of that license, and they were like, yep, that's him. That is Greg Webb. On February 23rd, police arrive to the construction site in Orlando, Florida. They find Greg Webb, and they arrest him and say, you are being charged with first-degree murder. Greg would tell the police that while I was on the run, I was in places like Belize, Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua. He always tried to find work while he was there, but he never could. And so he found his way back to the States, where he went to Florida and found himself a job working construction. At a pretrial hearing, someone would testify, another officer testified that Greg had told this other officer that he found Anna's body on his kitchen floor. And he looked at her and realized that she had been shot. And he, checks his .38 caliber, notices that there are a couple of bullets missing. And so he decided then that I need to make it look like she disappeared because I don't want to get in trouble for this. I didn't do this, but I can't get in trouble for it. And so he did all the stuff of cleaning her body, putting her to the trunk, and bringing her to the field. He told this officer that he and Anna had been drinking very heavily the night prior. They got really, really drunk, and he doesn't really remember anything. He said he noticed that he had blood on his hands, his neck, his arms, everywhere, and he was having a really hard time getting all the blood off. And so he's now saying at this point, oh, I don't know if I did it, but if I did, I don't remember doing it. I had to black out. I was so drunk. And because they did not have physical proof to show how exactly what happened that night, they had no proof that he premeditated this. They had no proof that they had virtually very little physical evidence. And because they could not confirm why he did this, how he did this, what was the motivation behind all of it, if it was pre-planned or not, all they can really do was agree to let him plead guilty to manslaughter. And that's what he did in 1994. And for that manslaughter charge, he was sentenced to 8 to 19 years in prison. He always maintained his innocence, though, despite never offering anyone else up as a suspect, despite him literally telling another officer, I saw her dead on my kitchen floor, blood on my hands, my arms. My gun was missing 2 bullets that turned out to be the bullets that shot her. I don't remember anything. I blacked out. It's obviously he knows he did it. He did try to suggest, well, maybe this girlfriend that I was seeing at the time, maybe it was a jilted ex, broke into the apartment and saw I was talking to her and wanted to take Anna out. But anyway, he was convicted and he was sentenced to prison. And by August of 2002, Greg Webb was released from prison on parole, and he only served 8 years. And the apartment building they once lived in, where all of this happened, had since been demolished. 8 years for killing someone. It sucks that we have these, at times we have these burdens of proof, he did it, he killed her, but you can't prove that it wasn't done in the heat of the moment. And because of that, you can only sentence him to so much time because that's the law. It sucks. If you take a life, it should, there should be a much more a longer sentence for it. But you have to prove the reasons and the motivations behind it. And they couldn't say that. They couldn't say that he intended to kill her that night. They had no way of proving that. And so, the justice system is not exactly always something we like. We'll disagree with it all the time, but the justice system is the justice system. The law is the law. And unfortunately, a guy got a slap on the wrist for killing an innocent woman. And so I guess you can say that Anton sort of got the justice she rightfully deserved. This man kept a literal scoreboard of his murders, and he may be one of the most prolific serial killers that you may have never even heard about. Hello. Okay, bud. Okay. Oh, Jesus. What a creep. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the Scoreboard Killer. Viewer discretion is advised. Now, typically, when we talk about a serial killer, usually, almost without fail, their origins are a bit dark. Typically, they are people who have dealt with a lifetime or a youth lifetime of emotional, physical, and sometimes sexual abuse, likely from a family member. Their parent or parents are alcoholics. Sometimes the parents are never in the house. And most serial killers just grew up in a very unfortunate situation. But that is not the case for this guy. Randy Stephen Kraft was born on March 19th, 1945. He was born in Long Beach, California. I have been to Long Beach a few times. That's where the Queen Mary is. And it is a beautiful ship, side note. And if you live in that area, you've never been to the Queen Mary, go to Long Beach and visit that thing, because it's stunning. So anyway, end of side note. Randy was one of 4 kids. He was the only son. He had 3 sisters. His parents were Opal and Herbert Kraft. Those are 2 of some of the oldest names I've ever heard. The Kraft family was never a rich, wealthy family. They were also never really a poor family. They lived a very modest life. Both parents held jobs, and they did whatever they could to support the family, support the kids. It was even said that, Randy's mom and his older sisters, they all really kind of pampered Randy. They took really good care of him, actually. His dad wasn't abusive. His dad wasn't really an alcoholic, but his dad was pretty distant. And the reason why is because his dad was trying to work as many jobs as he could to support the family. And so he just wasn't really ever around, per se. But yeah, they lived a very modest life. Nothing special, nothing spectacular. They were just kind of your average, everyday American family. And Randy, as a kid growing up, was described as just this really quiet but good kid. He was well behaved. He never got into trouble. He was described by many people as being really sweet and kind and nice. He was also intellectually ahead of his class. He was really, really intelligent. By his teenage years, Kraft had these thoughts or aspirations of becoming a U.S. senator. He really kind of fell into politics around his teenage years. By that time, he's living in the Huntington Beach area with his family, California. He was enrolled at Westminster High School. He graduated without any issues. He did great. By the time he graduated high school, Randy Kraft had began to realize or understand more about himself, that he was gay. But he was afraid to really tell anyone in his life because, again, this is the 60s, and if you think people had it bad in the 80s and 90s for being gay, it was even worse then as well. And so coming out was just not really an option. He would then enroll in Claremont Men's College in Claremont, California, and he was trying to get a bachelor's degree in economics. By 1964, while in college, he would end up getting a job as a bartender. He worked at a local place called the Garden Grove, and this was a cocktail lounge that was meant for the gay citizens of the area. And also at that point, he's experimenting with casual sexual encounters with men. He would travel kind of in the area around. This is before Grindr and all that, of course, but I guess he would meet people in the old-fashioned way, and he would, have a porky time with them. That was a weird way to describe it. It's said that Randy Kraft had tried to low-key, plant the seed in his parents' and his sister's minds that he was gay by inviting over male friends of his, to their house for dinners and stuff, trying to coax them into it, but it didn't really work. In 1966, he had his first run-in with the law. He had tried to proposition for a sexual encounter an undercover officer. Now, at that point, Randy had no criminal history. He had never been arrested. He had always been this really good kid, behaved, nothing on his rap sheet. And so they basically just dismissed the charges and let him go. By his senior year in college, Randy's studies had begun to kind of plummet. He was not paying attention in school. He wasn't completing assignments. He was just sort of distancing himself from school, which was very unlike him because he was always very career oriented, which meant he was very education oriented to get to that career. And so this would actually lead to him failing to graduate. And so he was held back and he had to wait another almost a year in order to kind of make up for everything. And then he finally graduated. He then joined the Air Force after school, and he at one point was promoted to Airman First Class and a supervisor. And then by 1969, he had told his fellow Air Forcemen that he was gay. He revealed his homosexuality, and they gave him a general discharge immediately afterwards. His dismissal was based on medical issues, which wasn't true because he had no medical issues. He was discharged immediately after telling them he was gay. The Air Force always refused to ever change that status. This then caused him to kind of move back home with his parents. He got a job as a bartender, and that is what he was doing by 1970. At that point, he is about 25 years old. And he was in Huntington Beach where he met a 13-year-old boy named Joseph Allen Fincher. The photo I'm showing is an older photo of him who would later, many years later, testify in court about this encounter. Joseph had recently run away from home, and so when he encountered Kraft, Kraft invited him to his apartment. And he promised the 13-year-old boy, there's a woman there that you can have sex with, but that was a lie. Almost immediately after Kraft got this 13-year-old kid into his apartment, he offered him substances that the young boy willingly took, and this caused him to basically fall unconscious, and Kraft then beat him and then sexually assaulted him. And that is when he went from a pretty decent, normal citizen to a human piece of shit. But this was only the beginning. Joseph managed to kind of come to where he escaped the apartment. He alerted authorities, or actually a bystander alerted authorities when they saw this young kid who appeared to be like completely out of it. But the police would say to him, because you willingly took these drugs and willingly entered the apartment, there's nothing we can do. What? Okay, that's unusual. Fine. And so no charges were ever pressed against him. By 1971, Randy Kraft would enroll at Long Beach State University. At one point, he began to date a young man who was like 21 or 22 years old at the time. And then the murders began. And when I say murders, this guy, he did a lot. He did a whole lot. Between 1971 and 1983, Randy Kraft is suspected to have murdered, I shit you not, 67 young men, all between the ages of 13 years old and 35 years old. Most of his victims were lured back to his home and with the promise of, drugs or alcohol or sex. Once he had them essentially unconscious because he also drugged them, typically in his car, he would torture them. He would sexually assault them, and then he would kill them. His most common method of murder, or the way he killed them typically, was either he strangled them with something or he manually strangled them. Sometimes he bludgeoned them. He would burn his victims' genitals with the car lighter thing. Some of these men were found with objects shoved into their rectums. Some of them had objects inserted into their, the other part. He would mutilate some of them. He would dismember some of them. On October 5th, 1971, a 30-year-old man named Wayne Joseph Duquette, his body was found. He was the first person found that would eventually be linked to this killer. Duquette had been a bartender at a local gay bar who had last been seen on September 20th, 1971. 15 months later, a 20-year-old Marine named Edward Daniel Moore was discovered murdered. He had last been seen at Camp Pendleton, leaving it on December 24th, 1972. His body was found 2 days later near Seal Beach, California. He had been tied up, and he had abrasions all over his body that indicated he had been shoved out of a moving vehicle. 6 weeks later, the body of an unidentified male between the ages of like 17 and 25 was found. And this was along the Terminal Island Freeway in Wilmington. He had been killed by a ligature, and he had a sock shoved into his rectum. 2 months later, the body of a 17-year-old boy was found. His name was Kevin Clark Bailey. He was found along a freeway near Huntington Beach. They determined that he had been sexually assaulted, and he had things inserted inside his front part. Then a couple months later, another unidentified male's body was found, killed in a very similar fashion. And then a 20-year-old was found. His name was Ronald Weeb. He was found along the 405 freeway, and he had been strangled to death. It also appeared he had been at one point bound because he had like marks in his wrists and his ankles. By November of 1974, 3 more bodies were found. 20-year-old Malcolm Little, 19-year-old James Reeves, and then 18-year-old Roger Dickerson. All of them also had objects shoved into their rectum or their other part. On January 3rd, 1975, a 17-year-old named John Laris had been kidnapped. He was found murdered the following day near Sunset Beach. He had objects shoved into his body, and he was strangled. A couple of weeks later, 21-year-old Craig Jonatis, his body was discovered. He was found along the Pacific Coast Highway in the parking lot of a hotel. He too had been strangled to death. So by January of 1975, they actually have a tally of about 14 men at that point who had been found murdered, typically strangled and castrated or defiled in some other way. And it was the police's belief that all of these victims were being killed by the exact same person. On March 29th, that's my birthday, 1975, a young man named Keith Crotwell and a friend of his named Kent May, they were lured away from Long Beach, California, and they were seen getting into the Mustang of a man. They were both given, I guess, high levels of Valium and also a lot of alcohol. I guess from what I understand, Kent May was able to get away, but Crotwell was not, and he was later found on May 8th, murdered. A very aware bystander, I guess, noticed potentially someone by the area where the body was eventually found, and so they felt whatever was happening was suspicious. They didn't see the body, but felt something was strange, and so they took down a license plate number. And so that license plate number was given to police, which led them to Randy Kraft. Police brought him in for questioning. Now, I don't know if the friend who managed to get away, I don't know if he actually visually identified Kraft or not, because he was like in a catatonic state when this all initially happened, when he finally kind of came to and his friend was missing. But I don't know if he actually identified him or not. But Kraft was interrogated by police. Apparently, the autopsy of Crotwell determined, I don't know how, but that he died of an accidental drowning. And there was no physical evidence to actually connect Randy Kraft to that murder. And this is why I kind of assumed that the friend who managed to get away was not able to visually identify him or not, because the police wanted to file a murder charge against Randy Kraft. But the DA was like, we don't have anything to suggest this was him. And so they let him go. And this is actually despite, at that point, Randy Kraft had admitted he met 2 youths in this parking lot. He did, had fun with him or whatever, but then he says he dropped him back off at the parking lot. And that's his story. And they had no choice but to go. I mean, they didn't believe him, but they just had no choice. They had to let him go because they had no evidence. And then all was quiet for almost a year. And then on December 31st of that same year, 1975, a 22-year-old man named Mark Hall went missing. This was near San Juan Capistrano. He would later be found. He was essentially tied to a tree, and he had leaves and other things shoved all the way down his trachea. I mean, just completely filled up. And he died of asphyxiation slowly from all of that. And he also was sexually assaulted and he was sexually mutilated. The autopsy determined that, unfortunately, he was alive during all of it. And he died a very slow and very painful and very uncomfortable death. It's believed that because he then got into a relationship with a man in 1976, that this created a long gap of of nothingness when it came to the murders. He was involved in a relationship, and so he wasn't killing anyone. Now, the majority of the murders happened in California, but he was also known to have killed some people in Portland, Oregon, because he had traveled up there. And a couple of young men were killed in that area, and they were killed in a very similar fashion that all the victims he had killed in California, it's all basically identical to it. He then eventually found his way back to California. At 1:10 a.m. on May 14th, 1983, California Highway Patrol officers pulled over a car who was driving a little iffy, appeared to be a drunk driver, and this was on Interstate 5 near Orange County. The driver pulled over. He then immediately got out. He was like stumbling around. He took a beer bottle and he threw it on the ground. The officers approached him kind of cautiously, and then he eventually identified himself as Randy Kraft. His pants were unbuttoned, as if, who knows, I don't know. The other officer approached the passenger seat. When they opened the door, they saw a young man in that seat slumped over like this, not moving whatsoever. And he had a jacket covering his body. The officer tried to alert him or wake him up, but it wasn't working. This is because that man was dead. When he removed the jacket, his pants were undone and he was nude, essentially. And his hands were bound with a shoelace. The man was later identified as 25-year-old Terry Lee Gambrell. He had been a Marine stationed at the El Toro Air Base. His cause of death was strangulation. Randy Kraft was arrested. The body was taken to the morgue. The car was confiscated, and they searched it for evidence. In the car, they found a lot of alcohol. They found tranquilizers, a whole bunch of prescription drugs, stimulants. The floor of the car was just drenched in blood. They also found an envelope with about 50 to 60 photos or so, and all of these photos were of nude younger men. And then they found a ring binder, and they found a piece of paper with a blood stain on it, and it had 61 coded notations. They then got a warrant to search Randy Kraft's home. And in the home, they found more evidence. They found belongings that belonged to men who were either missing or had been found murdered. Police at the apartment found fibers from, his carpet that were identical in appearance to fibers that were found on some of the victims' bodies. They were able to forensically analyze these carpet fibers, and again, they're a visual match, but they didn't really have a way of saying that this was the exact carpet fibers, but it was close enough. They also found a photo of one victim who was deceased that was in this, envelope of photos. And this deceased victim was sitting on a couch, and then the couch seen in the photo was the exact couch and positioning and everything seen in Kraft's house. They also found a roll of film in his house that they developed, and they found photos of victims Eric Church and Roger Duvall, and these were photos of them sitting in Kraft's car. And in one of those photos, there is a very obvious ligature mark around one of the victims' necks. So these were photos of the victims in the car dead. And then they go back to that piece of paper with a bunch of coded messages or coded sayings on it. But what they finally determined was that each coded phrase or word or whatever was matched to a murder victim or a double homicide case. Some of these things weren't really coded messages, they were initials of some of the victims. And then some of them were the form or the form, I guess, of murder or what happened to that victim. Though it didn't have the victim's name, it just had what he did to them in some kind of coded way. And whether or not he tortured them, strangled them, killed them, assaulted them. And some of them had locations of where some of the bodies were found. So there's 61 names, or 61 entries, I should say. Some of the victims they found, they couldn't exactly link to this list, but it was also a coded list, and so it was really difficult to match. But there was enough on that list to determine that this was a list of victims. So on May 16th, 1983, Randy Kraft was charged with 16 counts of murder. These are 16 victims that they can link with absolute positive certainty that Randy Kraft was responsible for doing. This is after police interviewed over 700 people, investigated his house, his car, the last known whereabouts of a lot of these victims and where he was during those times. They did a very detailed and extensive investigation into this guy. He was charged with the murders of 20-year-old Edward Moore, 17-year-old Kevin Bailey, 20-year-old Ronnie Weeb, 18-year-old Keith Crotwell, 22-year-old Mark Hall, 18-year-old Scott Hughes, 23-year-old Roland Young, 20-year-old Richard Keith, 23-year-old Keith Klingbeil, 21-year-old Michael Inderbeaton, 20-year-old Donald Crizel, 19-year-old Robert Loggins, 21-year-old Eric Church, 20-year-old Roger Duvall, 18-year-old Jeffrey Nelson, and 25-year-old Terry Lee Gambrell. He's also suspected in the murders of Wayne Duquette, Vincent Cruz Mestis, Malcolm Little, James Reeves, Roger Dickerson, John Laris, Craig Jonatas, Richard Crosby, Gregory Wallace Jolly, Jeffrey Sayer, Mark Allen Mars, Michael O'Fallon from Portland, Oregon, Michael Cluck, also from Portland, Oregon, Christopher Allen Williams, Raymond Davis, Robert Avila, Arne Mikhail Lane, Brian Witchler from Portland, Oregon, Anthony Jose Silvera, also from Portland, Oregon, Dennis Alt from Grand Rapids, Christopher Shoeborn, also from Grand Rapids, Lance Taggs, and several unidentified male victims. On September 26, 1988, Randy Kraft goes on trial for these murders. The prosecution brought forth over 150 people to testify. They had over 1,000 exhibits to show as evidence. This was one of the longest, most detailed trials in that part of California, like ever. They had a ton of blood stains found in the car, in the apartment. They had hair samples found in the apartment, the car, on the murder victims. There were fingerprints found on certain pieces of evidence near the bodies that matched Randy Kraft. Fingerprints found like in the home that matched the victims. They had the photos of certain victims deceased in areas known that Kraft owned, like his car and his house. They had a bunch of prescription drugs found in Kraft's home and car that matched drugs found in the system of many of these victims. That's more circumstantial because they can't obviously prove that that was the exact drugs used, like his drugs were used, but it was enough. They found a buck knife in his car that had some blood on it. They had receipts from Randy Kraft showing what parts of the country he was in, with timestamps to prove he was in places like Portland, Oregon, and Grand Rapids, and also various locations in California. They had so much unbelievable amounts of evidence against this guy to show that he committed these murders. The trial lasted over a year. To put it into perspective, I think the average length of a murder trial is sometimes around 3 to 4 weeks. Because of how extensive this trial was and how much evidence there was, the jury had a boatload of things they had to sift through. So this wasn't like they went into the room, came out 5 minutes later and said, yeah, he's guilty. It took them 11 days to deliberate because of how much evidence there was. They had to do that due diligence as a jury. With that much evidence, with that much testimony, it was going to take a long time regardless. On May 12, 1989, Randy Kraft was found guilty on all 16 counts of murder. He was also found guilty on a count of sodomy, and I think a couple of counts of emasculation. On August 11th, 1989, the jury recommended the penalty be a death sentence. The judge would agree. There was evidence with a lot of these murders to indicate that there may have been at least one other person involved, possibly helping Randy Kraft. One of his former lovers, a man named Jeff Graves, was suspected to be a potential accomplice. But he died of AIDS in 1987, so there was really not much more they could do about that. Just recently, in November of 2023, they identified another victim of Randy Kraft. 49 years ago, or 50 years ago almost at this point, there was a victim who was found who had been unidentified for that entire 49 years. But one of the bodies was finally identified as Michael Ray Schlicht, and he was from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. His body was found on September 14th, 1974, indicating he was one of the first victims of this guy. And he was 17 years old at the time of the murder. And so while he isn't being charged with that murder, it is believed that this was just yet another victim. They have tallied up to what they believe and think is at least 67 victims of Randy Kraft, known as the Scoreboard Killer. He was called the Scoreboard Killer, obviously because of that sheet of paper he had with the coded names and messages and stuff on it. 67 murders. To be honest with you, I had actually never heard of him before. Not until very recently, which is unbelievable because this dude is prolific. I mean, that's 16 murders on its own that he was convicted for is a shit ton. But 67 murders? That's insane. Not to mention, around this time, there were actually at least one or two other freeway killers going around. This guy, Randy Kraft, was at one point mislabeled the freeway killer, but the freeway killer was actually someone different. And so that's why he's been given that moniker of the Scoreboard Killer to differentiate him from the others. There was a guy named Patrick Kearney who killed at least 28 boys. And then there was also William Bonin. Now, William Bonin had a very similar fashion of disposing of bodies. And so there was some confusion at points of what victims belonged to who. Bonin tended to kill people usually between like 12 and 19, whereas the average age of Kraft's victims were more like in the 20s, the ages of 20s. So it was a convoluted mess that there were numerous serial killers going around, but you know, they kind of were able to link these victims to the right people. But Randy Kraft is exactly where he should be, on death row. And unfortunately, to this very day in 2024, he's still there. He has not been executed yet. I know he has had some appeals out there, but they've obviously been denied. But he is rotting away in a prison cell awaiting his execution. And so the 16 victims he was officially charged and convicted of, plus the 67 total he likely killed, if not more, at least they all will finally get the justice they all very rightfully deserve. But that is it for this case. True crime, Rooney Dooney Dingleberry Dongs. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, please subscribe, give this video a like so more people can see it. Follow me over on TikTok. Recommend a case to my email. Name of the case, where it happened, when it happened. I'll add it to the list. It'll be a while. Blah, 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 blah. You know the drill at this point, folks. Unless you're new, then you don't know the drill. And that's the drill. That was the drill. I don't use drills because I'm a gay man. Gay men don't use tools. It's true, it's a fact. We're allergic to them. A screwdriver? A what? What is that? Is it a drink? Yeah, sure, I'll take a screwdriver. I'll down one. I'll also take a Long Island iced tea. That's not a tool, but I will take them because they're delicious. Absolutely delicious. But that's what I was saying. Stop calling me a man. A man with tools. Tools. Tim the Tool Man. I don't know where I'm going with this. Do you? Do you know where I'm going with this? I don't know. This is... I'm a man. I identify as a male, right? But I'm a gay man. So tools... Actually, you know what? I literally used tools yesterday. I was putting some stuff together, and this has all been a lie. Gay men can use tools. It's true. Oh. Well, this was something. I was supposed to say goodbye, but I rambled? That's not even a word. I rambled on for God knows how long. Well, you'll probably know how long based on the timestamp of the video. You'll be able to calculate exactly how long I rambled on for. But right now, I don't know how long I've been rambling on for because it's been, I don't know. I don't know. Oh, God damn it. Hi. Well, anyway, if you're new here, I am so sorry that you don't know what this is about. But if you watch on my videos, you'll know. Okay. Smell you later, folks. That hurts so bad.